Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Peggy Damon Priestley is a SNCC activist, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, whose mother, Ellen Craft Damon, was a Wednesdays woman from New York in 1965. Peggy's a lifelong civil rights activist from a long line of noted activists, and she has also enjoyed a career in public health. Reverend Dr. Courtney Pace is the author of Freedom Faith, the biography of SNCC activist Prathia Hall, who's an important character in the play and who became one of the first Black women to be ordained a Baptist minister. Courtney has also edited a collection of Prathia Hall's remarkable sermons, Beyond Eden, which I'm currently reading, published by the University of Georgia Press and soon to be out in paperback. Marlene McCurtis is a filmmaker who is making a documentary film about Wednesdays in Mississippi. Marlene early on recorded interviews with all the surviving Wednesdays women, and I've seen some of the excerpts from the film, and it's fabulous. And finally, we are happy to welcome back Holly Cowan-Schulman, who participated in the first Sheroes panel. Holly is a professor of history at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville and the eldest daughter of Polly Cowan, who co-led the Wednesdays in Mississippi program with Dorothy Height. And I expect our speakers tonight may be talking about Dorothy Height, Ellen Damon, Doris Wilson, Polly Cowan, Prathia Hall, Ruth Batson, and perhaps others. And I know that each of you could talk for hours on this subject, but to hold the time for some questions and discussion, I would ask you to speak about your Sheroes for about 5 to 7 minutes each, and then I'll ask a follow-up question, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions with the audience. And I'll give you a gentle time reminder at the 7-minute mark. And I'm going to begin with Peggy. Peggy, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I'd like to ask who your WIMS Wednesdays in Mississippi Shero or Sheroes are, and what's your relationship, perhaps a story or experience that sheds light on this person, why you admire them and their positive effect on your life.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to participate. My Shero has always been my mother, Ellen Kinlaw Craft Damon. And she was born in 1916 in Indianapolis, Indiana, of all places, because her father was a traveling YMCA secretary. And as the family moved around to his various assignments, they happened to be in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1960 in November. So she was raised with her older sister, Virginia Craft Rose, in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, and finally in New York. And wherever they could, they continued to talk about the legacy of their family, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I think the things that bound the two sisters together and that were strong throughout my mother's life were a belief in God, a belief in education, and a belief in community involvement. So those were some themes that, you know, they ever since they were young, they continued. My mother died at the age of 90 in 2007, and her sister died at the age of 98 in 2011. So they lived long and very active lives. I would like to use the following words to think about when I think about my mom. She was intelligent. She was serious, she was kind, she was determined, and she was adventurous. She also was a justice advocate, a racial warrior, a civil rights activist. She was a moderator and a peacemaker, and that's one of the roles that she played by being on the national board when the board was working in the 60s to reconcile the fact that there was a colored Y and a white Y, and she and Dorothy Height worked closely for that. But my mom's real passion was as our family griot. She was the keeper of the stories. And that, I think, gave her the greatest pleasure, as well as being a mom and a grandmother and an auntie and a friend and a community worker. And she was also an amateur photographer way before cell phones and video. So I have to thank her for recording things and taking pictures of things before this digital and such a social media age. So those are the things that my mother's core character, I think, was about. And since I have friends that have known me on this video, I'm so glad, because they knew my mother. And you know, there's a lot of people when you get older, they're not still alive, that knew your parents. And so Diane and Wendy and Pixie knew my mom, and I'm so happy that they're able to join us today. So the other part of my mother was her professional life, where she was a social worker. She was the first colored woman to live in the dorm at Bates College in Maine. And she went there from 1934 and graduated in 1938. And so there she was in the woods of Maine, surrounded by a whole bunch of white students. And she was the only Black woman with 8 Black males that happened to be at the college at the time. So she enjoyed a lot of fun with them, who became lifelong friends. But at the time also, even though she was a social work I think she was a sociology major, she also was a poet. And my mother not only wrote poetry, but she performed poetry at various coffee clutches and events throughout New England, partly to get a little extra cash while she was in school, but she also performed some of them in Black dialect. She did some of James Weldon Johnson's poems and so on. And when she talked about it later on, she said, "Oh my goodness, I wonder what people thought when I was a sociology and sort of an English major." But what she was doing is she was bringing Black culture with her wherever she was, because as you mentioned, Nicole, we're fortunate to know our formerly enslaved ancestry. The Crafts, William and Ellen Craft, who escaped from slavery in 1848 in Georgia, and my other part of my family that were enslaved at Monticello under Thomas Jefferson. So those are the things that my mom continued to bring with her wherever she went. And I'm going to just stop, because, as you say, we can continue to talk a lot. But I was fortunate enough to get from Marlene one of my mother's reports of her visit to Jackson in 1965 for Wednesdays in Mississippi. And it's so interesting. She had never been to the South before, so Jackson and Mississippi were her first places. Even though our ancestors came from there, we didn't go there. And she said that it was very difficult for her to reconcile what she heard about all the bloodshed and the Ku Klux Klan and everything like that in Mississippi. And when she landed, she thought she was going to see police dogs, and she thought she was going to see all kinds of horrible things right in front of her face. And this was 1965, as you know, in Mississippi. And instead, her visit was very nuanced. It was very complicated and complex, not only because of the project that she was with, but also just her own expectations of what the word Mississippi meant. It was a flag word for those of us who are African American in this country, as one of the most horrible places to be from. My husband, Ernest, happens to be from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and he left there when he was 5. So, this WIMS exercise and project and visit for her was a wonderful opportunity for her to feel that sometimes you get one impression when you're far away, but when you're actually within something you really don't know. And she saw all of the different layers and levels, from the white lawyers who came to help with some of the cases, to the white women that were part of the project, as well as the Black women who shepherded so many of the women through it. So I think I'll stop there, and if there's trying to think if there's anything else that I forgot. Oh, my mother and Dorothy Height were part of the Harlem YMCA, where I grew up in Harlem. I actually took tap dancing and all kinds of things at the Y. So we're really a Y family. My grandfather was YMCA secretary. He became the director of the Harlem YMCA on 135th Street in New York, in Harlem. And we grew up in the Y, and then one of Mom's greatest achievements was an enjoyable being on the national board with Dorothy Height and traveling around the world for the national board, empowering women in the Philippines, in Hawaii, and everywhere they went. People claimed my mother because of the way she looked. She looked Filipino to some people. Some people, she went to India, I think. She looked Indian. So she was definitely happy to be a woman, an international woman, and someone who was always involved with women's rights. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I just wanted you to add, though, how she came to be, how she came to join Wednesdays in Mississippi.
Well, okay, I can easily do that. Holly Cowan, I forgot to mention, Holly, you were 1 year behind us, I think, right? You were, yeah. So Holly, Jeff, Lisa, and I, the Cowan family, we went to Dalton, and our mothers met at Dalton. And Holly's mother, Polly, who you know of, was also part of the American Jewish Women Council. Is that right? American Council of Jewish Women. And my mother was involved with the YWCA. So when Polly and Dorothy Height got together, both of the women invited my mother to participate. So it was really through the Cowans as well as Dorothy Height that my mom was involved, through the YWCA and then through Wednesdays in Mississippi.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have all kinds of follow-up questions, but I'm going to keep moving and we're going to swing back around. So I would like to ask Courtney, same question, who your WIMS Shero is, and related to Wednesdays in Mississippi, and your relationship and how you got involved in this, with these people in this project.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. And Peggy, I was so glad to hear about your mother's artistic side, because I see that in you, and it's just so clear that that's part of the legacy that you continue from her.
But
My Shero is Prathia Hall. I started researching her life in 2008. I wanted to study some figure at the intersection of race and gender, someone whose story would allow me to explore a fuller picture of 20th century American religion, a fuller picture of Black church, of Baptist identity. And her story provided so much opportunity for that. Her family was from the South, but she was raised in the North. She was very strongly involved in her father's social gospel ministry at Mount Sharon Baptist Church, which he planted and she later pastored. But she attended the predominantly white Philadelphia High School for Girls. And so her life was always, I don't know if I want to say juxtaposing, but she always was aware of different contexts and she was in them simultaneously. And so when it came time to go to college, even though her dad had raised her on Langston Hughes and Howard Thurman, he was too scared for her to go south. So she went to Temple, which is within walking distance of her childhood home. He passed away in February of 1960, within the same week of the Greensboro sit-ins. And what I've heard from so many people who joined SNCC is that Greensboro was the signal. that is what helped everyone confirm I need to go. Some people left in the middle of college, some people finished college and then went, but that was a catalyzing event. So she finished school in 1962, headed down to Atlanta, and was quickly recruited by Charles Sherrod to help with the Southwest Georgia project. And there were a lot of college students who wanted to get involved with SNCC, all well-meaning. Some of them didn't understand the nuances of Southern culture and the kinds of propriety that they needed to show, just the practical guidelines they needed to follow to keep people safe. So Prathia was able to help translate some of that, particularly for the white students. Things like, you're going to wear stockings. We will never have a Black man and a white woman walking together. Whatever race the driver is, everybody else duck. You will wear a dress and gloves. You will go to church, regardless of the religion you practice. And just helping people understand that's how they would build relationships with the people. And, you know, going door to door, she was able to talk to people. She was very good at oral communication. In fact, the first thing everybody I interviewed told me is there was something about her voice, her presence, her power, and even folks who weren't practicing a religion at that time, that was still what they said. They felt God when she would speak. And so imagine her asking you questions about your family and trying to get to know you to encourage you to register to vote. She was incredibly effective, which is why she was targeted by police in Southwest Georgia and in Selma. She led the Selma project outright by 1963. And then in the end of 1963, early 1964, she was coordinating all of civil rights work in Atlanta, again, arrested. And that court case actually became a high-profile national showdown between state and federal jurisdictions, something similar to what we're seeing play out today in some prominent court cases. And she left SNCC in 1965 for a variety of reasons, but the one that she talks about the most is following Bloody Sunday, the wounded were gathering back at Brown Chapel where they had started their journey. And she said there were some SCLC workers telling people, if you can't sing, I love Jim Clark in my heart, and mean it, then you wouldn't see Jesus when you die. And Hall was so disturbed by that. She called it spiritual extortion, that people needed space to grieve and mourn and be angry. But the fear of violence and inevitable white retaliation would mean that people would die. And so I think SCLC was trying to keep people alive. She just couldn't be part of how they were doing it. And in 1965, 1966, SNCC moved in more of a Black Power direction. Hall appreciated opportunities to work together. And so now as an independent, that's the kind of involvement that she pursued. She was helping with education, women's career empowerment. She ran for the school board. And then the whole time that everything I've been telling you has been going on, she sensed a call to ministry, which she pushed down because she was a woman and knew how difficult it would be as a Black Baptist woman to claim a call. But she reached a point where she had to acknowledge it. So she pursued theological education. She was the first woman ordained by the Ministers Association of Philadelphia and vicinity. And moving toward her call complicated some of her personal life. Not all of the people in her family were supportive of her pursuing her call, and there was some pruning to help her align what she was doing with how she sensed God leading her. As she was a pastor and involved in academics, and when women get academic jobs, we don't just get to be the professor. We always get an administrative responsibility too, whether we're credited or paid for it or not. And so she was dean of chapel and teaching for the seminary program and the DMin program, and she's speaking all over the world. I mean, she was just constantly on the move. And like so many people, so many activists throughout history, there are tolls that takes on your body to stay at that level of advocacy that long. she finally got her dream job in 2000 as the MLK Chair of Ethics at Boston University School of Theology. She had reached financial and residential stability. That's when she was diagnosed with aplastic anemia. She tried to find a bone marrow match, but it was very difficult for people of color to find bone marrow matches because of white rape of enslaved Africans had created such a diverse gene pool that it's hard to find someone who was a suitable match. And we understand why people of color are skeptical to trust medical practices that have historically exploited and abused Black bodies. So one of the things she did in those last 2 years of her life was raise awareness about how important it is to register as a donor, particularly for certain kinds of care. And now her condition is considered treatable. And I like to think that she played a large part in helping humans come together so that fewer people would die of this disease. And you know, when you look at who prominent Black clergy women are today, they all have a direct line to her. Either she mentored them, she mentored their mentor, she helped them find funding for seminary, she helped them get their first placement. She built this network of young women, old women sensing their call and helped make the path wider for them than it had been for her. And through the end of her life was not only trying to help individuals, but trying to work within systems to make higher education ministry not just preparation for ministry, but actually getting a church and being able to have a career in ministry a viable option for more women. And when I first started working on her, obviously when you hear any piece of her story, you're like, tell me more. But the more I got to know about her, the more I just couldn't stop thinking about her. I couldn't set it down, and I wanted to understand more and more about how she grew up and what the kind of commitment and wisdom she showed at 22 is not typical of 22-year-olds. And I wanted to understand what was it about her life that prepared her so beautifully for the kind of leadership that she had in the South, the perspective that she was able to give people, and the impact that she consistently made through her career. So I would have to chase down sources. I went to the 50th anniversary of SNCC. I went to the 50th anniversary of Southwest Georgia. I interviewed as many people as I could. I interviewed the people they recommended I interview. I went through memoirs and secondary sources to find names, and then I would connect with them. Then the year I defended my dissertation, I came into her papers, and that gave me a much fuller look at her later life, which had not been as well documented. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to share her story and help her receive the prominence within history that she has so long deserved. Everywhere I go, I meet someone who knew her. It does not matter. Everywhere I go to speak, someone will come up to me at the end and tell me they knew her. And it's beautiful to see the way that her guidance continues to empower people, continues to work for freedom and liberation.
I just want to add that I work with Prathia in Southwest Georgia. Sherrod also recruited me from New York. And we thought, even though we were all around the same age, I think something you said, Courtney, is she was an old soul. And so, you know, we dealt a lot in knocking on the doors and walking those dusty, dangerous roads. She was kind of, she seemed older than us, and she was definitely one of our leaders. So I'm so glad that you have memorialized her life so beautifully.
Thank you. I learned that her SNCC colleagues lovingly called her Mother Prathia or Prayerthia because she was known for just for her care and her spiritual guidance. Yes.
And she could pop up and do a sermon in a minute. So it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. And I just have to give a plug here for Courtney's wonderful books. This one I used during the play development, and this one I just got, which is her collected sermons. And I'm just into the second sermon. It's a beautiful essay about her before the sermons begin. And I just want to say something about Prathia, whom of course, I never met her, but as I was writing the play, I had to make decisions about which characters to include because there are hundreds of women who were
Yes.
rock stars in this story. And you cannot have hundreds of women or even like 48 of them waltzing across the stage. So I had to compress and consolidate. And I had names of characters on colored sticky notes up on the wall. And I took Prathia's down 3 times. Every time I took it down, she just insisted. I'd wake up the next day and her spirit just insisted that I put that name back up. And I wasn't even really sure why, because it took me a while to find her place in this story. I knew where it was at the beginning, but I didn't really know too much in the middle, and I didn't know the part at the end of the first year. And but she fought more than any other character to be in this show. And finally I said, okay, I'll figure it out as I go. Prathia, you're in. And that was my experience with her, and I've never regretted it. I too just learned so much from her.
She
Okay.
was one of the key strategists for Freedom Summer in 1964, thinking about how SNCC could most effectively register voters in Mississippi and do so in a way that would keep people alive. There's I'm trying to remember the book. It had a lot of photographs by Danny Lyon, so it's probably some kind of photography book from the movement, but there's an excerpt of a speech she gave where it was clear they understood someone was going to die from what they were doing in Mississippi in the summer of 1964. But Prathia was helping lead them in conversations about how to protect people, but also how to insist that this purpose was worth the danger and that all people were prepared to understand what they were agreeing to do in a theological, ethical, philosophical lens, to be prepared for the very real and merited fear that governed so much of their time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Marlene, who is your Shero? You've talked to so many Wednesday's women.
I have. First of all, I just want to thank you, Nicole, for all the hard work that you've been doing and your passion about these women, and many of them who were kind of in their second act. First of all, I just want to say Prathia Hall, to me, she's also one of my Sheroes. She's not the one I picked, but she definitely is. And it was because of her. It was because of her calling Dorothy Height and saying, we need help. We need you to come down and bear witness to what's going on in Selma in 1963, when 300 kids were arrested in Selma, thrown in jail, and their parents didn't know where they were. And from that visit, with Dorothy and Polly, that was when the seeds, I believe, of Wednesdays really started, right? So Prathia has her hands all over this in so many ways. So it's hard for me to pick Sheroes, one of my Sheroes. I've spent over 15 years researching and filming with various women in this story, and also listening to audio recordings of them, because Polly Cowan had the brilliance to use this kind of, I think, which is kind of probably newish technology, to tape the women. So when the women came back from their trip south, they would do debriefings, and she taped those debriefings. She also taped several workshops and meetings. So there's all this really rich audio. So I got to really fall in love with a lot of these women through listening to them, like Ruth Batson and Fannie Lou Hamer, and recordings that were kind of behind the scenes and very intimate sounds. So I love all of them, but you do have to pick one here. So I decided to pick Winifred Green. And Winifred Green isn't in the play, but she makes it into the film. And Winifred is one of these Southern women. She was in the South, fifth generation Mississippian. Her father and grandfather were segregationists to the core. They felt, as she said, Black folks were where they were, white folks were where they were, and all was right in God's heaven. But somehow Winifred saw a different vision. And at 21, she was at Millsap College. She met a woman, Pat Darian, who's another one of my Sheroes. And they kind of met each other and they were kindred spirits. And they decided to start Mississippians for Public Education in an effort to keep the schools open when Mississippi was starting to integrate their schools. And they were integrating their schools one grade at a time, starting with the first grade. And this was 10 years, mind you, after the decision to integrate schools board v. Board of Education. So Winifred was there behind the scenes working very quietly and also interacting with a lot of the Wednesdays women. She met Dorothy during that time. She met Polly during that time. They became, Dorothy, Polly, and her became lifelong friends. She spent a lot of time with them. She was 21, a young woman at the time. She was married. She wound up divorcing her husband and going on to work in Georgia in 65, where she was working helping to register voters in rural Georgia. She also went on to work in education and equity, coming back to Jackson. I met her when I had the pleasure of interviewing her. Now, it took me 7 years for her to decide to let me interview her. And that's not uncommon with a lot of our women, that we call them our women. So in terms of the folks that work on the film, because a lot of them, one, didn't feel as though their story was important enough to be told. For Winifred, I think she was doing the work and she didn't have time to stop to be interviewed by this voice on the phone from Los Angeles. So I was in Jackson and I gave her a call, Jackson, Mississippi. I said, I'm going to come to New Orleans. That's where she lived. Drove down to New Orleans and we spent the day together. We had a wonderful kind of New Orleans meal, lunch together. I think it helped that my best friend was from New Orleans, so I knew a little bit about the territory in the city. And also I have roots, my family roots are in Mississippi. So my mom grew up in Mississippi. So I had that familiarity with her. And we had a great day and she drove me around. Winifred being Winifred, she didn't take me to the French Quarter. She didn't take me to the Garden District. This was a couple of years after Katrina. She took me to the 9th Ward because there were things I needed to see down there. And she gave me a tour and we talked that day about race, about economic justice, and about how we could bring about long-lasting change. It was a great conversation, and Winifred and I became friends after that. Friendly in the way that you are with someone who's interviewing you, and in my role as a filmmaker, but we did become friends. And I interviewed her at the SNCC 50th anniversary in Jackson. She came there. And she was intelligent, she was insightful, she was knowledgeable, she was funny, and she was a great storyteller. And we continued to talk. And as I said, Winifred, like so many of these women, her activism did not end in 1964 or 1965 or in the 60s. She continued her lifelong commitment to social justice. As I mentioned, she left Mississippi in 1964, and she went to Georgia to work on voter registration, school desegregation. She continued to work in programs on social, political, and economic justice for the American Friends Service Committee. She came back to Jackson. She continued working on equity and education. One of the things she would say is that, she worked hard to keep the schools integrated or get the schools integrated. She wanted to make sure particularly Black students, were getting the education and the help they needed to succeed. And that's what she dedicated her life to that. She also served as the senior consultant for the Southern Rural Black Women's Project that was started with Unita Blackwell, another amazing Shero, who was involved with Dorothy and Polly, and she was on the board of directors of the Children's Defense Fund for years. You know, one of my stories about Winifred, and I don't even remember why I was trying to get in contact with her, but I was trying to call her about something, and I left messages, and she hadn't called me back, and that was unusual for her. And so, and I knew she was kind of struggling with her health at that time, and I called her, and finally, in November, I think I started calling her in August. In November, she called me back. She was in the hospital. But she had called me back with the information that I needed. She had been in the hospital for 2 months, but she called me back to give me that information. I don't even know what the information is. What I do remember is that she took the time to call me. I think Maya Angelou says that people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel, right? And so she called me back with that information, and she passed probably a couple of weeks after that. But that's who Winifred Green was. She was this woman that, to the very end, if she could help spread the news and support social justice, she was there. So that's why, you know, she's my Shero.
Thank you so much, Marlene. That was so beautiful. Thank you. And Holly, I would like to ask you the same question. Of course, you know many of the people associated with Wednesdays, beginning with your mother. Tell us a little bit, tell us what you would like to tell us about your heroes.
Needless to say, my Shero is my mother. Can you hear me? Because I was having trouble.
You're a little bit soft. If you can come a little closer to the mic, that's good.
Is that better?
Um,
I'm not sure where my mic is, but I'm doing my best.
yes. Yes.
So, needless to say, my hero, my Shero, is my mother. I have a piece in the Jewish Women's Archive which describes my mother, Pauline Schulman, Pauline Cowan, should anybody want to go, Pauline Spiegel Cowan, should anybody want to look that essay up. My mother was born in the suburbs of Chicago in 1913 in a very Jewishly deracinated family whose religion had become Christian Science. She went to
Looks like you froze, Holly. Are you there? Oh, it's so frustrating to have these problems. All right, I think we may have lost Holly for right now. Hopefully she will come back in. So looking forward to hearing about Polly. Lots of technical problems tonight. So we're just going to carry on here. And when Holly comes back in, we'll just slide her back in. Let's see. I do have a follow-up question, and you all may have covered this a little bit, but my question is, our Sheroes face challenges and changes. And can you tell me, I'll start with you, Peggy, what specific challenge or change faced by your Shero, your mother, has inspired or changed you?
Yeah, interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind was really how challenging it was for her to be a part of the YWCA, which was an organization that was segregated when she joined. And one of the most important things that she did is that she chaired one of the conferences where the initiative to eliminate racism wherever it exists by any means necessary became their motto. And my mother grew up in a mixed environment. Every environment where she lived, there were always white people, and there were always not so Puerto Rican, but it was mostly a black and white world. And for my mom, she navigated that really, really well. So I think that has been something that has made me feel as if I haven't traveled as much as some of you, but I do feel as if I am a citizen of the whole world. And that's why when things are happening like in Palestine and Israel right now, I can identify with pain because my mother identified with difficulty, but she also was talking to people on all sides of an issue. And so the role that she played in the YWCA, in the national board, and even locally in New York City, as I mentioned, one of her attributes was as a peacemaker and a moderator. So I think I'm a little more fiery than her. She was kind of calmer than I have. I have a more radical temper. And I miss her countenance because she had an ability to listen to both sides and to find solutions. She was a counselor. She was a personnel counselor all of her life at stores. Some of you from New York might remember B. Altman and Company. Oops, what happened? Are we there? What happened?
You're fine.
I can't see me. I don't know where I went. Okay, there we go. So that was one of the things. And so was your question what challenged her has helped me grow? What was your question? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a person of I consider myself, I have many ways in which I define myself. I'm a great grandmother right now of 5 babies. That means that for my great great grandparents who escaped from slavery, my great great grandchildren know me. And it blows my mind that I can be in the same world as my great 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 grandchildren. They're 10 down to 1 year. So with mom, she always made it possible to be in your skin, be where you are, but always looking at the margins of life as well. So I think that's something that was challenging for her because she grew up and came out of a segregated society. In fact, in Indianapolis, the Klan shot at my grandfather. They had to hide across the street from the YMCA in the early 1920s. So she was able to see many sides. I won't always say both sides, but she was able to see many sides. And I try to do that mostly also in tribute to her, because she's not just my shero for Wednesdays in Mississippi. She's my shero in life. And I really feel her presence, and I feel as if that my life is a continuation of her life. And I'm so grateful and so proud of her because of that.
Thank you so much. I feel I want to know more about her. And I had one question I wanted to follow up with you, Peggy, I think I heard you say at the very beginning that when she joined Wednesdays in Mississippi, your mom kept it a secret, but for a long time.
A long time, because my brother Henry Kraft Diamond and I were activists with many people, some on this call in New York City. We picketed Woolworths, and my brother and I were involved in the civil rights movement. And then I went south to work in SNCC in Southwest Georgia. And my mom, I came back, I went to Boston University, I got married, I had children. Mom never mentioned Wednesdays in Mississippi because Polly, correct me if I'm wrong, if she's on this. Not Polly, I meant Holly. Or you, Marlene. Didn't they fly in Mary Rockefeller's plane?
Yes, they did. She did. That's what she did. But it was a secret. I mean,
Right. It's a
things
big secret.
they weren't supposed to say anything.
No, and Mom, and even when you interviewed my mother, she was suffering from Parkinson's at this point. When she was able to speak, she would whisper about her experience because she was still holding on to the protocol of the secret, where if the Wednesdays in Mississippi women were known to be flying into Jackson, something might happen to them or someone might be in danger. So yes,
Yeah, exactly.
my mom didn't break a lot of rules, and that was one of the ones that she kept. And it was so touching to me when she began to talk about it that she would still whisper when she said what she was doing.
That's another, yeah, it's another whole dimension to that.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
It is, yes.
Thank you so much. And Courtney, the same question. Prathia Hall faced many challenges, many changes. Can you talk about what specific challenge or change faced by Prathia has inspired or changed you?
I think about this a lot, actually. And it seems as though there's a common thread across the many stories I could tell you where she overcame adversity. She was incredible. She was smart. She was wise. Those don't always go together. She would always say, I'm 5'6", but I should have been taller. But she had a commanding stature. And there were folks who couldn't handle her excellence coming from her. When she sued the police deputy in Southwest Georgia, they made her remove her hat because she looked too dignified, and they couldn't bear to see a Black woman look so dignified in public. Or when she would speak in back in Philadelphia, folks didn't recognize that it was a sermon because it had come from a woman. Or even as she, as an adult, said, I want to preach, I want to go back to school. Her husband wasn't supportive of her call. And so many times she went on with what she knew she was becoming, regardless of others' acceptance of her, which is extraordinarily admirable. That's not easy to do. And but she stood her ground. She knew who she was. She knew who God had made her to be. And she continued without fear. She also didn't bother with trying to fit into the box. She understood that respectability politics is a lie. And so, there's the way you're supposed to preach. Well, according to who, right? She harnessed her own voice and sort of pioneered a brand new way of preaching that is now recognized as its own academic discipline. And she did that with her community strategizing as well. She was helping Marian Wright Edelman with the Children's Defense Fund figure out how to partner with Black religious organizations and Black community organizations so their resources could stretch farther. And there weren't a lot of people doing that, but she certainly, her embodiment was never the problem. It was other people's perspective on her embodiment. But she didn't back down, even when it was hard. She would look white people in the eye, knowing they might use that as an excuse to shoot her, but she would do it anyway, because that's what human interaction should be like. We should look each other in the eye. We should shake hands. We should see each other for who we authentically are and tell the truth. And it's just so beautiful the way she did that. So when I've been in moments, personal or professional, where I have felt underestimated or unsupported, she has been the singular voice in my head, helping me to continue to get out of unsafe situations, to advocate for my family, to advocate for my career. It's I don't believe in a Calvinist understanding of, you know, this happens so that her life stands on its own. But it's almost like she left a path of how to navigate this, and not just logistically, but spiritually. How do I change my understanding of God and church family as these things happen to me, around me, and how can I learn from what's happening without letting it weigh me down? But how can I also acknowledge when I need to rest, when maybe I do need to change my paradigm? I think she just did all those things so beautifully. And I find myself turning to her story when I don't know what to do. And I always find her guidance. Something she said in a sermon, something someone in an interview told me about how she handled something, that I don't feel as scared. When I hear her voice, I don't feel scared.
Thank you. That's just beautiful. And as I read her sermons, the imagery, the directness, the just incisiveness of her thinking and how it's all connected with her heart, I really recommend to everybody getting to know Prathia Hall. It's remarkable. Thank you very much.
Yes, there are some video and audio sermons online. So if people Google, they'll be able to find, and then
Yeah,
they
I
can
was going
hear.
to ask you that. Yes.
Yes. So I would encourage people to do that, just so they can hear her delivery, her cadence, her inflection, and the way she would sort of alternate between speaking and poetry and singing, even, to communicate it. I can't do it justice. People need to hear her themselves.
Thank you.
It's interesting, Courtney, when you said how tall Prathia was. I always thought she was about 5'10" because of the way she carried herself. And so it's interesting, even though we were contemporaries, I think I was a little bit younger or older than her, whatever. But she always, as I said, seemed kind of a step ahead of us in a way that was not looking down on us. But she, because there were some magnificent people, Bernice Reagan Johnson, and all of the freedom singers that we knew and went to jail with us. But I did think she was taller and and in a way more mature. The other interesting thing is Charles Sherrod, who was a minister and a divinity student. I wondered, he must have recruited Prathia a little bit after myself and Kathy Collins. So she came, we didn't work as long together. I worked in Lee County, she worked in Dawson County. But, when we would have our meetings and in the churches, she would often speak from the pulpit, whereas the rest of us didn't, which is interesting. It was as if she was destined for the pulpit, So I'm looking forward to reading your books. Having known her really as a teenager, I look forward to it. Thank you.
You are also in the book, and the picture on the cover of Freedom Faith is her giving announcements in a mass meeting. She isn't preaching in that photo. She's speaking at a mass meeting.
Yeah.
Dan
Oh,
Ryan took that photo.
Yes, Dan, I have that book right in the other room. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's see, Marlene.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have so many thoughts going through my head right now, and listening to Courtney talk about Prathia, and just in some ways how like someone like Prathia should be kind of on everyone's lips, right? So, I'm really drawn to the fact how important this work is that we're doing in terms of elevating these women and sharing their stories. So I just want, and so that just really strikes me. So thank you, Courtney, for the work that you're doing, because I do think it's so important that we are informed by these types of people who have been there, who've laid the path before us. And that's why I love history. I mean, I just absolutely adore it. And I love historians and and people who do that work, that digging. In terms of Winifred, for Winifred, one of the reasons why I picked her was because I think there's a lot of talk about how do you become an ally, right? This idea of how do you engage and become an ally with folks maybe that don't have the same background or the same struggle, but you want to come in and you want to be able to do the work with them, and how to do that, and also the price that one can pay for that. And for Winifred, she paid a really, really big price. She lost her family. I mean, she was completely ostracized by her family. She did not get any inheritance from them. And this was a prominent family. She lost all of her friends. She mentioned to me that eventually, probably in the 1980s, late 1980s, she finally started being invited back into the fold of some of her high school girlfriends. So she lost complete contact. So the movement really became her family. She even had relatives that suggested that she would benefit for some time in a mental institution. So this is the kind of, I mean, she paid this price, but she also, as an ally, and I think this is one of the things that I really is kind of interesting about Wednesdays in Mississippi with Polly and Dorothy's partnership. I think one of the reasons why it worked so well is that Wednesdays in Mississippi came out of a Black women's organization, right? So that was something that was very clear. It was led by Black women, but allies came in. And so I think when we were kind of thinking about what lessons Wednesdays can teach us, that's one of the lessons I think that's really there. And I think that that's something that Winifred embodied. And I'm completely always in awe and motivated by these women, each and every one of them. And also Peggy, who's on this call. I mean, I've met so many amazing women through this work. Nicole, you're one of them. These women who are so passionate. And I think that how it inspires me is going back to an interview I did with Marin Wright Elderman. And in her interview, she said that these were women who were willing to put their lives on the line. And they had this stick-to-itiveness, right? And courage to do something that was not even talked about. It wasn't like they needed the spotlight shined on them. They were in the background doing the work. And Marion also said that she felt lucky to have the privilege to be exposed to folks like this. And for me, I believe this. Every time you think I can't get up, for me, every time I think I can't really work on this film anymore, I can't, it's too much, or whatever the task is behind, in front of me. If I don't want to get up in the morning, or I don't want to work another Sunday, because I think women's work is a 7-day-a-week job. I get up because of the examples of these women, the examples of women like Prathia Hall, like Winifred Green, like Polly Cowan, like Peggy Priestley. That's what gets me up, and that's what keeps me motivated. So,
and you keep us motivated, Marlene. I'm grateful, even though Marlene started by interviewing my mother, we've become friends and colleagues, and I just am so excited that this play that you've done, Nicole, and the work that you've done, Courtney, will be impetus for us to finish the film. We've been raising money out here in LA for how long, Marlene?
I'm
forever.
I'm sticking with it. That's my
yeah. So I think it'll segue nicely into something that different from a play, because it's a documentary, but the work that women making movies and things that Marlene has done. It's truly admirable. And even though Polly's not on the call, her brother Jeff was one of the students that was in 1964 Freedom Summer. So Jeff and I and Marlene out here in Los Angeles, we've seen each other and we work together. And he certainly has continued to his academic work as well as his work around the world. The Cowan family is an extraordinary family, and it's so wonderful when Jeff invited Dorothy Height to his home. And I got a chance to see her in that context because, of course, I had known her as a child, you know, as a young person. So there's just so many things converging here, you know, with the sense, Courtney, that you were talking about, kind of the destiny of Prathia. I think we as women here, we're continuing that destiny. We're creating it. You, Nicole, delighted to meet you. The playwrights that I listen to when I watch the play, we have to keep going because these stories, and I call myself an oral historian. I've studied it and I've done interviews like all of you have done, but I think to be talking at this time when there's so much dissension and so much people going to their camps and saying, I can't see your pain because I'm in so much pain. We faced that at a time in the 60s when we thought we were going to just call attention to the moral crisis of America. So we had hope. I don't have that same degree of hope. I really don't. I'm very, very despondent about the state of the world. But then when I think about my ancestors who were enslaved, I say, no, got to keep going. There's always going to be opposition, and it's just not in my DNA to stop, and nor was it in my mom's.
You know, it's so funny because I often think, Peggy, like, and I was actually on social media with one of Jeffrey's sisters, and I said, I wonder what Polly and Dorothy, what advice give us now, you know, because I think that it's one of the things that's what drew me to the story is this idea that we can talk across difference, you know, and we can kind of figure out what it is that needs to be done. And this, you know, and this, the Wednesdays women were about deep listening. And and so that was such an important piece.
Yeah.
Taught, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I think also about, I believe I have this right, that Dorothy said it's the separation that creates the fear, not the fear of the separation.
Right.
So when I think about that question, you know, what would Dorothy and Polly, what advice would they give us now? It would be the various different ways of being more, trying to be more together, trying to listen more deeply.
Yeah, and I think I'm looking at my friend Wendy Osserman, who is a choreographer and a dancer, and brings stories through art as well as storytelling. So I'm interested in what some of the people on the call, because we have, I don't know everybody, but I think for me, the art and the poetry of what we're doing is as important as the actual facts, because there's that dance, there's that that duality that creates the facts, and it moves into a more artistic arena where with art we can say things that we might not be able to say politically or in any other way, because art has to always push us beyond what it is that is acceptable at the time. So that's why the Freedom Singers were so important in the movement, and why music was so important, and the hymns and the things that we sang, they gave us the strength to carry on when the Klan was shooting into the churches, you know? So if we keep that as a metaphor, there's people shooting at us now with words.
Mhm.